Well, originally The Sims, was very focused on the architecture, and so we put these little simulated people in there, and we had to make the people very robust in a way to where we could put them in any situation, and they would behave fairly appropriately to that situation. Eventually, the people were working so well, better than we thought they would, that they become far more interesting than the architecture.
One of the great skills that I think Will has, besides being really, really, really smart, is that he's really flexible. And when a good new thing comes along, he goes with it. We needed something so that you knew which sim on the screen was the one you were controlling at this moment. So purely to get something in the build, I put in what we have today as the plumb bob.
The original Sims, there were 8 basic needs the Sims had to refill periodically. And how you chose to refill those needs would basically influence their long-term evolution.
The Sims is interesting because it really is based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so it has this sort of basis in science that was the driver. And at the same time, it really brings together this idea of these objects that are going to affect your life in crazy ways. It goes to the fantastic as well as to the real. And I think that one of the interesting things is watching how people interact with that. The original tutorial with the Goths and how exactly we were going to engage players with this idea behind the Sims, that they had these needs that you had to take care of.
It was called Project X for a while. We called it Dollhouse for a while, but that was like the kiss of death if you ever wanted to sell it to a young boy. So then Will said, well fine, we're gonna name it something really butch. And for a while it was called the Tactical Domestic Simulator.
About 6 months before we released the game, we started this thing on a weekly process where we invited some of the fans, the early fans who had signed up for this newsletter, to come in and watch this webcast of us playing the game. And so we'd be in the office playing the game, but webcasting the screen of the game out to everybody who was watching on the web. And they'd be basically writing back in the chat room, can you make him do this? Can you have him do that? What happens if they kiss? What happens if he goes out the door and, reads the newspaper?
The Sims was really a funny development because, first of all, it really wasn't like any game that was taking place within development in Electronic Arts. So there's a little bit of head scratching. Where is this going to go? How is it going to play? How is it going to feel?
I remember very clearly the moment when I realized that this thing was a monster, which was E3 of 1999. And we had been given an exceedingly small station. The line that formed to see it was so long, you couldn't see the end of the line, and it would snake through other companies' displays.
The original game was very hardcore in terms of the amount of effort you had to put into really being successful.
I mean, really looking back on it, the most proud accomplishment was the team that we had built that shipped The Sims.
I don't think that anyone knew that The Sims was going to be the phenomenon that it actually has turned into, and I don't think you really could.
There's this sort of universal human appeal and fascination at having pet people.
People were fascinated with it, and yet at the same time, it was so out of the mold of games at the time that, would it really get an audience? And when it did take off, and we sold 1 million units in a month, and that's what led us to do things like start free downloadable objects, that we just had fun with the community of players.
Probably my favorite part of The Sims is going in and using it as an architectural, design set, kind of the ultimate, construction set for buildings.
I really love building out the house, and I use all of the cheats, believe me.
I like to play on speed 1 all the time because I like to just sort of watch. I like to see all the great work that the animators have done. I almost always name my lead sim the same thing, is Snapple Wapple.
I think every player of The Sims goes through this phase where they're, the complete experimenter. How many ways can I kill my sim? It was when we watched people creating just walled rooms, and kind of watching the slow death of a sim, or when they would take the ladder out of the pool and they just sort of swim and swim and swim and slowly.
We were in development of Sims 2, and it's like, how else can they die? Like, how else can you kill a sim?
We have a tendency to make our own families. Often what we do is we juxtapose our own families with these kind of crazy characters, or we put ourselves in very curious predicaments. And I think it's because it's such a safe place to experiment. Creating your own family in The Sims and then making very strange things happen to them is really fun to do.
There are a huge set of players that just share the kind of messed up stuff that they can do to The Sims. I think you have to look at the psychology of some of the players and kind of go,
The Sims was probably the first game where I felt like I was definitely getting more entertainment from the community than they were probably getting from me. But I think The Sims really is all about player creativity. You know, it always was.
We make a game that's about enabling the player to be the creative director. We're giving you a set of tools, and so we've developed a unique sensibility for making The Sims that I think would be very, very difficult to recreate somewhere else.
All of a sudden, it just became this vehicle for players to tell these insane stories. And I think what surprised me the most when I came onto The Sims was how fascinating the simulation was that made those little Sims seem so believable.
I think one of the unique things about The Sims is that nobody's effectively copied it yet. You know, when you look at all the other game genres, usually like there's a big hit, and then everybody comes out with their version of the big hit, and then it's a whole genre.
It's hard to say what it's going to be. We know what it's not going to be 10 years from now. It's not going to be a game about violence or conflict.
For me, I believe in the next 10 years, as The Sims grows and develops and continues to expand, it will really be about giving players more and more what-ifs to explore. Just like any game, it's not for everybody. It just isn't. It isn't for everybody, and I think you have to accept that and understand that. If you think we've set down one big win scenario and this is how you go win The Sims, it isn't there. You're never going to find it.
At the root of it, one thing is, it's about people, and it's about controlling the lives of these little people, and I think there's something very refreshing about that when our lives are obviously so chaotic. One of the things about The Sims that really was the most fascinating thing for me is that their autonomy. They do behave believably, and I think that's actually the magic behind The Sims, is the simulation.
It's a game where we really enable the developers to put a little bit of themselves into each and every element of the game. I think the story and the span of The Sims is only limited by the span of human experience.
It was just an extraordinary, time in the industry. People were moving onto the web, communities were forming, and we just kind of took a risk on investing a lot in the community side, community online features for The Sims, kind of ahead of the curve there. And everybody on the team, I think was very interested in how do we serve the community, as opposed to how do we just ship a big, game and make a lot of dollars on that. I think the entire game team was focused on how do we make something that the community is going to embrace, feel empowered by, and take off in cool, unexpected directions.